Today's topic is consumer's equilibrium. Consumer's equilibrium refers to a situation where a consumer gets maximum satisfaction by consumption of a good or service and he does not want to change his current consumption. So it's like a state of rest for the consumer. Next, we have utility. So utility refers to the want satisfying power of a good or service. So whenever you buy a good or service, you buy it because it provides you some sort of satisfaction. That is utility. Utility is basically represented in terms of a unit, utils. You need to remember this. Next, we have marginal. Marginal in economics refers to change in total. So, marginal utility means additional utility by consuming an additional unit of a good or service. So, whenever you consume an additional unit of any good or service, there is some change in the total utility. This change TUN minus TUN minus 1 here means the change in total utility by consuming an additional unit of a good or service is represented as marginal. You can also represent it in this form. Next, we have total utility, that is a total satisfaction that is derived by consuming all the units of this particular good or service. For example, if I consume 1 unit of ice cream, the utility that I will derive from that 1 unit of ice cream is basically the marginal utility from this single unit. And let's say that I consume more than one ice cream. I consume like 3 or 4 ice creams. So the total satisfaction I derived from consuming all the 4 units is the total utility. 1 unit, let's say, gives me 10 utils of satisfaction. This is marginal utility. Second, 8, then 6 and 4. So all these individual utilities here corresponding to each unit represents marginal utility 10, 8, 6, 4. But in totality, when I add all these marginal utilities, I will get total utility here. So let's understand this relation between total utility and marginal utility once again. So here, as you can see, that when the number of units of ice cream consumed increases, simultaneously I have written marginal utility. So for each additional unit of ice cream, the marginal utility falls. This is in accordance with law of diminishing marginal utility that we'll be doing later. But I will just give you a brief description of this law. According to this law of diminishing marginal utility, as we keep on consuming more and more units of a good or service, the additional utility, that is marginal utility, falls. Though there are certain assumptions to this law, so in detail we will discuss this later, but for the time being, you just need to remember that as we keep on consuming additional units of a good or service continuously without any time lag, the additional utility, that is marginal utility from that particular good or service, continuously falls. We can also understand this with the help of an example. Let's say that I am thirsty. The first glass of water will give me maximum satisfaction in terms of utility. That means I'm not saying that is an equilibrium point for me, but that simply means that the first glass of water will, the first unit will give me the maximum of what we call as utility in general. So as I keep on consuming, or basically if I keep on drinking the after one more glass of water, my satisfaction level will fall, and then third unit, and after a while it's like I cannot drink any additional glass of water. That is, it will give me negative utility. My stomach may start aching. So here, this is marginal utility. With each additional unit consumed, the utility will fall, and this TU represents the total utility. So TU is basically summation of marginal utility. As you can see here, that from first unit, the TU and MU will remain same, and as we keep on increasing the number of units, TU is basically addition to MU only, 20 plus 16 are 36 and so on, and this is how we can find our total utility as a sum of marginal utility. Next, we can draw a diagram to represent this relation between TU and MU. You need to understand that when total utility is maximum, like in this case, the additional unit won't give you any additional utility. So zero marginal utility, that means total utility here is maximum and constant. And then if you still try to consume an additional unit, that will give you negative utility, discomfort. So your total utility will also fall. So let's understand here the relation between TU and MU in the form of a diagram. When MU falls but it is still positive, TU will increase but at diminishing rate. Please remember that the slope of the curve is like this and not like this, because this means that the curve is increasing at an increasing rate, like total product curve. Here total is not increasing at an increasing rate because of falling mu. So the rate of change of marginal values always determine the rate of change of total values. So since the marginal utility is decreasing here, the total utility will increase, or it may fall also in the later stages. But for the time being, as we can see here, that total utility is increasing but at a diminishing rate. You need to remember this. So when mu fall but is negative, total utility increases. When mu is zero, as in this case, as we can clearly see in both the diagram and the table here, that when marginal utility is zero, total utility is maximum, it is constant at this point. And when marginal utility becomes negative, total utility falls. Next is law of diminishing marginal utility, which states that as the consumer keeps on consuming additional units of a good or service, the utility derived from each successive unit keeps on diminishing. I have already given you an example of glass of water, which is applicable here also. So there are certain assumptions of this law of diminishing marginal utility which you should know. The first is cardinal measurement. That means the utility can be measured in terms of numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. The list goes on here. So as I have mentioned here, that the first unit provides the consumer 20 utils of utility. So you can consider it as an example here, then 16, 10. So according to this law, utility can be measured in terms of numbers. Then monetary measurement, utility can be measured in terms of money. Third is continuous consumption. There should be no time lag between uh, consumption of successive units. It shouldn't be the case that you consume the first unit in the morning and then the second unit at night. That shouldn't be the case. The consumption should be continuous. Then we have no change in quality of the product. Again, if let's say the first unit of the ice cream was inferior to the second one, then definitely the second unit will give you more satisfaction, but that's not the case. There is no change in the quality of the good or service. Then rational consumer, the consumer here is rational. He consider all the possibilities and will accordingly make a decision which will help the consumer to maximize his or her satisfaction. So next is marginal utility of money remains constant. Money is a commodity which according to this law, its utility won't fall, its marginal utility remains constant. Then independent utilities, that means if the consumer is consuming, let's say, more than one good, then the consumption of one good does not affect the utility of the second good in question.